So I was going to start off with a hand raise of asking people if they heard of AI agents, but Martin kind of stole my thunder. So please don't fall asleep during the parts that might be repetitive. I'll try to keep it engaging. But I still want to do a quick raise of hands. How many of you feel comfortable defining what an AI agent is? All right, that's like, for the recording, maybe like 10 people in a room of 100. So I take that. So first, let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Dominik. I work at Twilio. Since I'm in a room of marketers, you might know Twilio best from our segment product, or from, using Twilio to send SMS, do phone calls, any kind of like communication. I started at Twilio 8.5 years ago. I'm originally a developer by trade. I did a bunch of developer evangelism for Twilio and was the only marketer for Twilio in Germany before moving to the US to work more closely with the growth engineering team, move into ultimately becoming a PM for growth. And last year, I started a team that was focused on specifically exploring the future of customer engagement in light of rapid innovation around AI and emerging technology. And so as part of that, my team runs a program called Twilio Alpha, where we're really trying to figure out what does the future of customer engagement look like in light of emerging technologies like generative AI. And we use Twilio Alpha as our playground to try out new technology, try out new projects, and really explore that world. And so right now, our main focus is on what is the impact going to be of autonomous agents and artificial general intelligence. For context, that's basically AI that is as intelligent as humans on customer engagement, meaning how will it change if everything is powered by AI agents that can perform automated tasks entirely on its own? How will that change what channels look like, especially how do those channels look like that we're using to engage with our customers? What is the role of personalization and what does data look like? And lastly, because we're a developer company, how does that change APIs and so the developer experience of how we build applications? And so with that, I want to spend the rest of this talk to talk about how we believe AI agents will change your customer data, what you can do with your organization, your team, as well as the customer journey in itself. But first, I promise you, I'll talk a bit about what an actual AI agent is, because the reality is you're not alone with like the 10% here. Like most people have no idea whether we all agree on the same definition of AI agents. So for the sake of this talk, I'm going to define AI agents in a very specific way, and we're going to use that going forward. The first part is they're action-oriented. I think this is actually one of the most important parts. Like a chatbot that just regurgitate things out of like the training data is not an agent. An agent needs to be able to perform tasks, and it needs to evaluate whether it has enough data based on the user input and the tasks it performed to generate output. Only then it's an agent. A good example is ChatGPT in some cases. So in this case, I asked it to, evaluate some data on a link that I know is not in the training data. And it had to go and browse the web. It actually had to go 2 pages down from the link that I provided it. It got some intermediary data out to figure out what it needs to do next. And then it decided it had to write code in order to answer my question, because LLMs are not good at math. And so it wrote code to ultimately get to the answer that I had asked it for. And so this is sort of an agentic flow where it had to go through multiple steps. It had to go through some level of reflection to figure out, did I answer the user's question or not? Because we have the AI determine, does it have enough information? Did it reach the step? That makes it inherently non-deterministic, meaning there is no fixed path. There's no full-on flow chart. There is these things called chains. I would argue they're not actually agents because they're not reflecting on this. they're a fixed path. The moment you do not have this fixed decision path, you have an agent. There's pros and cons to that. On the one hand, it's incredibly flexible because we do not have to figure out every possible scenario that the AI might encounter, because we can argue about whether it's actual reason, but reason about whether it has figured out the answer. But it also means that how it gets to those results might drastically change from iteration to iteration, just based on the non-deterministic nature. And then the third part, and this is probably the most misunderstood part, agents do not have to be chatbots. They also do not have to be voice bots. As long as there is a user input, it performs actions, and then there's some output, it's an agent. In fact, to give you 3 examples, one, at the AI user group for developers recently, N8N presented their advanced AI feature. N8N is a workflow automation system. In this case, they had a flow. It might be too small. Apologies for that. I really tried to cram in a lot of examples in one slide. But in this case, it triggered on an email that had a specific keyword, and then it executed logic and generated another email. 2 other examples are Smallville, which is a research project where an entire artificial village is executed by agents. It's individual personas that walk around an actual village, plan dinner parties, figure out what has to be done, and that's entirely agents. It's entirely AI running this in a loop and figuring out, what do I have to remember? What do I do next? And then the last one is Voyager, which is one of my favorite ones. It's basically an agent that plays Minecraft all day, every day, and it has the ability to write code to create tools for itself and then reflect whether they're helping with its goal, and then continues to play and explore the world, build things. It's a fascinating research paper. All of these links, I'll share them later on if you want to read it, or just look at screenshots and videos. It's fascinating. So those are some examples. In the title slide, it said Twilio AI Assistant, so I briefly want to talk about that. The talk is actually not going to be too much about it, but my team, as part of this exploration of what do agents mean, actually built our own agent builder. It's currently in a developer preview. If you scan that QR code, you can request access. We're going to try to prioritize you. But it's basically an opinionated framework to build customer-aware agents, meaning they can solve problems by having access to tools. Those are the actions you want to take. By having access to knowledge, that's what you can upload, like have it crawl your website, upload PDFs, other files, or connect an existing vector database if you have one. But one of the big things we focus on is customer aware, meaning it can learn with every interaction about the user. Think about the user talking about their favorite favorite color being blue and their shoe size being 13. You can remember this by putting it into the segment profile that powers the customer memory aspect of our agents. And then you can use that in subsequent marketing engagements by creating audiences, creating entire marketing campaigns based on it. And vice versa, we can actually reference the data you already have about your customer so that when the agent interacts with the user, it actually is aware of who it's talking to. And then because we're Twilio and we have a variety of different channels, it's omni-channel, so it can adjust the way it's communicating via those channels, because talking via voice versus email versus something like SMS is drastically different. We don't sound the same when we talk about via any of those channels. So with that, let's tie back to sort of the overall premise of how will these agents actually change your customer data, what you can do, and your customer journey. I'm going to start with the customer data, and Martin touched on a couple of these things. But in order for me to set the scene, we have to do one more definition here, and there's really 2 types of agents. There's sort of the personal AI agents that are the ones that an end user interacts with and that represents that end user. And then there's company AI agents. Those are the agents that would be on a business website or in an app or things like that represent the business to engage with the customers. For this part of the talk, we're going to talk specifically about the personal AI agents. And one of the first implications and sort of what Martin mentioned around the 25% drop in website traffic, we're already beginning to see some of this because solutions like Perplexity or even Google's AI overview now provide you with answers to questions without ever having to visit the sources that were used to generate those answers. And this becomes problematic for things like attribution, for example, right? If you create content and that content is actually helping the customer and potentially starts their user journey at this point, but they never visited your website, so you have no touch point whether this was helpful because your website was crawled once, and now it's serving data. Like if you're lucky, you're one of these like few like really highlighted ones, but like Twilio in this case is like the logo in the bottom here. So like it doesn't necessarily give you the right attribution and visibility. And one company that especially struggles with this right now is Stack Overflow. For those of you who are not familiar, it's a common page for developers to get answers on questions. And ever since GitHub Copilot came out, which is an agent that helps you build your apps, and ChatGPT came out and stuff, they've seen even within the first like year and a half, a 56% drop in website traffic, and their entire business is getting people on their website. So they're in a really uncomfortable position and are now beginning to figure out how can we sell this data to these AIs instead. One of the other things that is interesting to think about with these personal AI agents is they change the way you engage with your customers and their entire customer journey. One of those examples is GitHub Copilot. Again, this is a tool, an AI agent for developers to use to build applications, and it lives within the editor of the developer. And in this case, I asked it to create some code to send an SMS to a phone number. I did not specify what vendor or anything like that. The AI wrote the code and it made the decision to use Twilio as the vendor. Now that's great for me because I work for Twilio. But like, this is not great if you're trying to enter a new market, or even if, honestly, if your company is the top ranking, but is trying to introduce a new product that replaces the old one, dealing with all that training data that generated that answer, like you will have to compete with that. And competing on SEO was already hard enough. Like this is a whole new level because it's not just about relevancy. It's actually about the amount of data that was used to train it. And this training doesn't happen every day. And this goes one step further, actually, when we ask more questions around things like, in this case, the code had told me that, or like GitHub Copilot told me to put in my credentials for this service. I'm like, how do I get this? And it actually walks me step by step through what I should be doing on the customer website. If I'm now putting my Twilio shoes on, I'm trying to change the customer journey, I'm trying to experiment, I have no control over this. This is entirely based on training data that might potentially be outdated. So like, even if it in theory might be helpful for the customer, it might actually be counterintuitive. It might not be the best way for that customer to use it, but I'm completely out of that control. And then the other part, so far we've only talked about static knowledge or knowledge that was trained in it, is that these AI agents, remember, one of the critical parts is they can perform actions. And with these actions, as AI agents become more capable, more people will expect that you can engage with your company through these AI agents. GitHub is, again, a good example of this already, where they released GitHub extensions, which allow you to engage with third-party companies like Stripe or DataStax and deal with their actual products without ever leaving your code editor. And that means now you have basically an entirely separate client that competes with like your website, with your mobile app, and you might have like less data about and less control over what you can track. Because it's not just about, in this case, like DataStax built this extension, so in theory they could still add tracking, but this is a limited current example. If we look at upcoming research, there's entire companies like Multion who are focused on how can AI agents effectively browse websites? How can they engage with websites they've never seen before? Because then it's no longer about OpenTable exposing a API that an agent like ChatGPT or Siri can use. But instead, it's about this agent just going on open table like a human would do and deal with failures and recover from that until it actually goes and books the appointment you try to book. And so if we're getting to that, now we're losing even more click tracking, right? Like we're losing so much information because how relevant is click tracking data, for example, if it's actually an AI clicking the UI and it's always the same after it figured out how to do it, you're losing again a bunch of data. And so for this section, I honestly don't really have a good answer of what to do other than like have you think about a couple of aspects. One, I think personal AI agents will both be a channel for discovery as well as a platform. They're going to change how we search, like Martin talked about. They're also going to change how how users will engage with companies. As a result, there's going to be changes in attribution and tracking, and you should continue to always think about like how do you track things if a certain thing a specific data point you have suddenly goes away. The other aspect is SEO and discovery are going to become harder. Like as you're competing not just around relevancy, but also things like training data, you have to find other ways to, get awareness, and social media and other channels might become more important because there you're not competing against training data and you have a slightly better chance of like competing against incumbents. So now that we talked about the customer data, let's talk about how AI agents will change what you as marketers will actually be able to do. One of the things I'm most excited about is it enables you to better understand your customers. LLMs that power all of these AI agents are incredible at processing large amounts of data. Gemini Pro 1.5 Pro from Google can now process 2 million tokens in their context window. For context, that means it can process 2 hours of video or 1.4 million words of data in a matter of a couple of seconds or minutes. This is incredible for you to be able to process large amounts of data and go through them, spot patterns, better understand your community, your customers, and do things like, monitor your online community. You could feed in, like if you have a Slack community, you could feed in all those conversations, spot trends, figure out who's about to churn, who's frustrated, like trigger immediately actions by, filing Jira tickets for feature requests or, send emails out with promotions for customers who are frustrated, for example. Like there's a lot of ways that you can better understand your customers and also enrich this data. Like I think one of the biggest things that we tend to run into is unstructured, like data that is not quite the format we expected it to. AI is fantastic at fixing that. Like I think I saw a former colleague of mine use it to fix addresses, one of the things that I've always been frustrated about. So there's a lot of ways for you to better understand your customers. And then there is the opportunity to automate repetitive tasks, deal with things like, creating reports automatically by connecting an AI agent directly to your databases. So that if your stakeholder has a question for a report you've never created, you can just give them access to that agent. They can write what they want. The AI can go crawl your different data sources, connect the data, and then generate the report for you without you having to, lift a finger. And there's a lot of tools that are beginning to pop up, as well as some existing workflow automations, because again, doesn't have to be a chatbot. So places like Make or Zapier or N8N all began to provide functionality to include either very basic or more advanced agent functionality directly into their products. At Twilio, to give you an example, we've actually created a thing called RFP Genie that our sales team is using to answer RFPs from our customers, where historically it would have taken several days for several SEs and AEs to answer the RFP. Now we can have one person just look over the output, check whether everything seems correct, and call it a day. And so there's a lot of ways for you to just scale yourself and scale your team. And then the last part I want to talk about is how AI agents will change your customer journey. The reality is, I think you probably all know this just as well as I do, like every customer journey tends to be unique, and it's incredibly hard to cater to every use case and every customer journey. So we try our best to like bucket people and figure out what are the common use cases, but it's never quite right? Like everyone is unique. And so what we end up with is support kind of ends up being this catch-all that has to deal with everything that we didn't create an experience for, that we didn't have an FAQ for. And that's not a scalable solution, because if you get more users, that just means you need to hire more humans to onboard them and get them accustomed to your product. You might as well get the customers onboarded. And so we've moved towards, historically creating more opportunities to use AI to deflect requests before they even reach support. The reality, though, is that like nobody actually likes these chatbots, because in reality, all of them are bad, right? Like they're essentially glorified FAQ chatbots that, answer a set of questions that are somewhere else on the website typically. And so like, I don't know how about you, but every time I see one, I'm like, and I think this goes back to your question about like the issues of like, how do we get people to engage with chatbots because they got so fed up with chatbots, right? And I think for me, the big part here is it's about resolution. Like we want to resolve the issues for customers, because the reality is by the time that the customer clicks on a chatbot or tries to contact support, they probably tried every other thing and they searched it, because I don't know about you, but I hate picking up the phone. I'm a full-on millennial. Like I do not want to pick up my phone. So by the time that I call, it means I already checked the FAQ page, right? Like, and so I think figuring out ways that we can resolve issues for customers is important, because realistically, by the time that they're reaching this, they've already hit sort of their last resort. And so I want to give you a bit of an idea of how we think about this. Because if you think about like, I think we've all been in this situation. I was just in it last year, where like you land and your bag is lost. And now you can go on your favorite airline's website and click on chat. And the reality is you will type in a message like, I just landed, I can't see my bags. The first thing is probably going to be like, here's the lost bag form, thank you. And then you try to argue with a chatbot until you eventually get to a human who can actually help you with what you're trying to communicate. But what if the AI actually is smart enough that it can act as an agent, and it can go and check your customer profile, and it can realize like, hey, these are the baggage IDs of the of the bags that were checked by this customer, and this is the current flight reference number. And now the AI can go in and use other tools that it's been given access to check the status of what your where your bags are. It can go and check what your flight details were, and then it can give you a personalized answer about, where your bags are, and offer you an option to resolve the issue, so that you can, even if you throw it a curveball, like telling it that you're in the Four Seasons and give it an incomplete address, the AI can go and reason and figure out what data do I actually need to resolve this customer's journey. And now we went from arguing with a quote unquote dumb chatbot for like 15 minutes to go and actually talk to a human, to resolving an issue in just 2 messages. And lastly, I want to give you a preview around some of these concepts in action with a case study we haven't released yet, so I'm a bit vague about this. But essentially the problem for this customer was that less than 5% of their new signups actually ever reached critical scale and successfully launched. And so the idea is that we would take an AI assistant, so remember that's Twilio's AI agent builder platform, to create an AI assistant that can provide sort of a personalized onboarding experience for the customer, so that they, as they're running into issues, they can actually go and learn and get handheld by an AI to launch, because, as I mentioned, every customer journey is unique. And so to get things started, we started off exposing this AI assistant on the customer's Talk to Sales platform, but not directly as a chatbot. Instead, if someone filled out the Talk to Sales form and they would have traditionally not qualified for having a human agent talk to them, we would route them into generating an initial outreach email based on the data we got that was personalized for this user. And then this user could continue to interact via email with this AI assistant to get their issues resolved and understand sort of like how to solve it. And the interactions were not looking like chatbot interactions. They were actually natural conversations to resolve the issues. And what we saw was actually a 5 times increase in activations for these customers compared to sort of traditional signups. And so to wrap things up, some takeaways here. 1, AI agents will drastically change the customer data you have, what you can actually do as a team, and your customer's journey. But I think this is actually really exciting, as much as there might be some challenges, because I believe it will enable us to treat every customer like a VIP by being able to, at scale, provide them with the right content at the right time to resolve their issues. Admittedly, some of the things I showed you are not what you would consider enterprise ready. But we're beginning to see more smaller and medium-sized companies, as well as some larger companies, begin to experiment and put these things into production and seeing great success. And so while AI is developing at an incredibly rapid speed, I would encourage you to experiment and try things out, find ways to like low risk experiment, but also there's other ways for you to, be prepared. 1, you're already at a meetup that talks about AI. This is a great way to stay up to date, as much as it's hard to stay up to date, but also get your data in order. Like, data is the thing that is most important about AI. The more you know about your customer, the better you can serve them. And AI happens to be really good at filling the gaps of your data where you might have them. And again, if you want to try out AI assistants, if you want to experiment with that, there's a QR code there, but also there's a QR code here for the whole slides, and I'll post them on my social. And with that, thank you so much for having me, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Specifically for AI assistants, we're currently not fine-tuning for the the actual reasoning loop, the function calling loop, because I think we're still in this space where if you're trying to fine-tune, you better really know what you're doing so that there's no unintentional consequences. And so you need to be really good at figuring out what are the things you want to benchmark. How do you make sure it's not getting, learning behavior you don't want it to? Because otherwise we're just going to end up in either AI learning things that you didn't want it to. Like, imagine AI figuring out that the best way to resolve a customer issue is to give a 50% discount. That's not great for your business. The alternative is, it becoming too rigid and not being able to handle new things. And that's why we went to generative AI to begin with. So there's a balance to strike. There's certainly applications for fine-tuning, but at the pace that AI is changing, especially on the foundational model side, the moment you start fine-tuning, you get kind of a bit of a dilemma about did I invest too much into the fine-tuning and now I can't switch to this new model. So we're doing a couple of different things. One is we use a sort of agentic RAG approach, basically, where we have one AI agent, basically, or rather a basic AI act as the expert on answering questions using RAG, and then we have a separate AI that acts as sort of the overall orchestration of answering the full flow, and so it can reference multiple different agents to get those answers. That being said, hallucinations are hard. One of the things that we've done, for example, in this case study that I talked about is we had an LM as a judge because this was an email use case. One of the benefits is we can have, we don't have to be fully real time, right? Like nobody expects an email to be responded within seconds. So there's a great opportunity to have an LM as a judge to figure out like, is it sticking to certain expectations of ours? But we're looking very much at like different ways to reduce the risk of hallucinations. Because my team is trying to think long term, we've set a couple of like rules of like, we're trying to figure out how do we get to a point that matches what the expectation in a couple of years is going to be, right? Like we're not going to expect users to still be there and like play human in the loop.